Be me, just a regular guy. My life before all this was simple, and I liked it that way. My apartment was my sanctuary. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. I had my setup in one room. My living room was for relaxing, kitchen was for cooking. Everything had its place. The routine was solid. Wake up, coffee, work, break for food, more work, video games or a movie, sleep. It was a peaceful existence, a quiet kingdom of one. Then, one afternoon, maybe a month or two ago, the phone rings. It's my Aunt Pearl. She's one of those people you just can't say no to. She helped my mom out when times were tough, always sends a birthday card with $20 in it, a genuinely good person. So when she sounds stressed on the phone, I'm already mentally preparing to help. She tells me about my cousin Vada. Apparently Vada's living situation fell apart suddenly. Roommate issues, something about the lease. The details were fuzzy. The bottom line was she needed a place to stay, and fast. Aunt Pearl asks if she could stay with me for a little while. Says she'll pay her share of the rent and bills, just needs a roof over her head until she gets back on her feet. I remember Vada vaguely from family gatherings years ago. She was always very passionate, arguing with uncles about politics at the dinner table. My first instinct was to say no. My peace and quiet were non-negotiable. But then Aunt Pearl hits me with the, "You'd be doing me such a huge favor. I'm so worried about her." Couldn't do it. Couldn't say no to her. I sighed and told her fine, Vada could take the spare room. Aunt Pearl was overjoyed, thanked me a dozen times. I hung up the phone and looked around my quiet, orderly apartment. I had a bad feeling, a very bad feeling. She arrived a few days later. I heard the buzz from the intercom and went to let her in. She was standing on the sidewalk with two massive suitcases, a backpack that looked ready to burst, and a cardboard box full of books. I didn't get a good look at the titles, but they all had those minimalist, academic-looking covers. I held the door open for her. She struggled to get the first suitcase over the threshold. I didn't offer to help. Not out of malice, just didn't seem like my problem to solve. My job was opening the door. She eventually wrestled all her stuff inside, huffing a bit. She looked at me, probably expecting some kind of welcome speech. I just pointed down the hallway. Spare rooms at the end on the left. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Then I went back to my room and closed the door. I could hear her dragging her things down the hall, a few thumps and bangs. Then silence. The invasion had begun. The next morning was the first real sign of what was to come. I went to the kitchen to make my usual pot of coffee. And there it was. Taped to the front of my refrigerator were 3 sheets of printer paper. At the top, in bold, capitalized letters, it read, "Safe Space Cohabitation Agreement." I stood there for a full minute, just reading it. It was a masterpiece of micromanagement. It had sections: preamble, guiding principles, rules of engagement, conflict resolution protocol. Some of the highlights included a detailed chore wheel, broken down not just by task, but by day and time of day. A rule about giving 48 hours written notice before having any guests over. A section on acoustic responsibility, which basically meant no loud noises after 9 p.m. A list of approved communal pantry items versus personal property, with a mandate for clear labeling. And my personal favorite, a clause about mandatory weekly emotional labor check-ins to foster a transparent and non-toxic living environment. I just stared at it. It was more detailed than any rental agreement I'd ever signed. I peeled one corner of it back to get to the Wi-Fi password I'd scribbled on a Post-it note underneath. Then I made my coffee and went back to my room. Later that day, she requested a house meeting. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a copy of the agreement and a pen, like she was about to ratify a treaty. I sat down across from her with my bowl of cereal. She launched into a speech. She explained that it was crucial for us to establish clear boundaries and expectations from the very beginning. She talked about mutual respect, emotional safety, and the importance of deconstructing traditional household dynamics. I just nodded along, eating my cereal. She went through the agreement point by point, explaining the reasoning behind each rule. The guest rule was to prevent anyone from feeling unannounced upon in their own home. The chore wheel was to ensure an equitable distribution of domestic labor. The check-ins were to prevent unspoken resentments from festering. It was a long speech. I think I finished my entire bowl of cereal before she got to the end. When she was finally done, she looked at me expectantly, waiting for a debate, for pushback. "So," she said, "do you have any questions or amendments you'd like to propose?" I put my spoon down. "Nope, looks fine." I took my empty bowl to the sink, rinsed it out, and put it in the dishwasher. "Okay, cool," I said. "Well, I've got to get back to it." I walked out of the kitchen. The look on her face was a strange mix of triumph and confusion. She had won, but there hadn't been a fight. She clearly thought I had agreed to abide by her new world order. In reality, I had just agreed to stop listening to her talk. The first test of the system came a few days later, involving the refrigerator. She had gone out and bought a label maker. She spent an entire afternoon organizing the fridge. There were little white labels everywhere. Vada's shelf, vegan. Vada's produce drawer. Communal condiments, needs discussion. It was intense. I didn't care. I bought my own food. A frozen pizza, a 6-pack of beer, some sandwich stuff. I put it all on the one unlabeled shelf at the bottom. I never touched her food. I never even looked at it. About a week into this new system, I came home from a grocery run. As I was putting my things away, I noticed her side of the fridge was looking pretty bare. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I heard her in the kitchen. I went out to get a glass of water. She was just standing there, staring into the open refrigerator. Her shelves were completely empty, save for a half-empty jar of almond butter. My shelf had a leftover slice of pizza in a box and some cold cuts. She looked hungry and angry. She looked at my pizza, then at me. I just filled my glass of water and drank it. "Night," I said, and went back to my room. Her rules had created a force field around my food. She was so committed to the idea of personal property that she couldn't bring herself to just ask if she could have a slice of pizza. Instead, she chose to be hungry and resentful. I heard a food delivery guy show up about 30 minutes later. The chore wheel was the next battleground she lost without me ever firing a shot. According to her color-coded chart, Tuesday was my day to vacuum the living room. Tuesday came and went. I did not vacuum. It wasn't a conscious protest. I just completely forgot. And even if I had remembered, I probably wouldn't have done it. The floor looked fine to me. By Thursday, I could feel the tension radiating from her every time she walked through the living room. She kept making these loud, exaggerated sighs. Finally, on Friday morning, she confronted me. I was making toast, and she came and stood in the kitchen doorway. "It was your turn to vacuum on Tuesday," she said. Her voice was tight. I took a bite of my toast. "Oh, right," I said, my mouth full. "My bad. I'll get to it." I did not, in fact, get to it. I had work to do. By the time I finished, I wanted to relax, not do chores. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the loud roar of the vacuum cleaner. I walked out of my room, and there she was, furiously pushing the machine back and forth across the living room carpet. She was slamming it into the furniture. She saw me and gave me a look that could have melted steel. I just gave her a little wave. "Morning. Smells clean in here." I went and made my coffee. Her own standards of cleanliness were so much higher than mine that she couldn't stand to live in what she considered filth. So she was forced to do my share of the work, fuming the entire time, while I remained completely unbothered. She was generating all the emotional energy for the conflict, and I was just a black hole, absorbing none of it. The problematic media rule was another interesting experiment. I like old action movies, the ones from the 80s and 90s. They're dumb, they're loud, and they're fun. One evening, I was watching one in my room on my laptop with headphones on. It must have been louder than I thought, because there was a knock on my door. It was Vada. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I took my headphones off. "Sure, what's up?" "I can hear your movie through the door," she said, "and frankly, the content is really problematic." I waited for her to continue. "It's just a constant stream of male aggression and the objectification of women. It creates a hostile atmosphere. It's on the list of non-approved media from the agreement." She pointed back towards the fridge, as if the sacred scrolls were posted there. I looked at her. Then I looked at my laptop screen, where a guy was jumping away from an explosion in slow motion. "It's just a movie, Vada." I gave her a small, polite smile. "I'll try to keep it down." And I gently closed the door. I heard her stand there for a moment, and then her footsteps retreated. She had come expecting a debate. She wanted me to defend my choice in entertainment so she could dismantle my arguments. She wanted a teachable moment. Instead, she got nothing. Just a closed door. It was becoming clear that her entire strategy for dealing with the world was based on engagement. She needed people to argue with her, to get angry, to participate in her dramas. I was offering her none of that. I was a void. The guest situation was probably the point where she started to really lose her grip. My buddy Jimmy called me one afternoon. He was in the neighborhood and wanted to stop by to play some video games. I told him to come on over. He showed up about 20 minutes later. We set ourselves up on the couch in the living room, turned on the console, and started playing. We were probably being a little loud, yelling at the screen, celebrating a good play. About an hour into our session, Vada's bedroom door creaked open. She emerged, wearing a bathrobe and a thunderous expression. She stood in the entryway to the living room, hands on her hips. Jimmy and I were in the middle of a tense match. I noticed her out of the corner of my eye, but didn't acknowledge her at first. She cleared her throat loudly. I paused the game. "Hey, what's up?" I asked. "Who is this?" she asked, gesturing at Jimmy. "This is Jimmy. Jimmy, this is my cousin, Vada." Jimmy, a good-natured guy, gave a little wave. "Hey." Vada did not wave back. "According to Section 4, Subsection B of the Cohabitation Agreement," she began, her voice shaking with righteous anger, "we are supposed to give 48 hours' notice before inviting guests into the shared living space." I looked at her. I looked at Jimmy. I looked back at her. "Yeah, this was kind of a last-minute thing," I said. "He was just in the area." "That doesn't matter," she insisted. "The rule is the rule. It's about respecting each other's space and safety." I just nodded. "Okay, you're right. My bad." Then I picked up my controller. "Ready, Jimmy?" I unpaused the game. We went right back to playing, the sounds of virtual combat filling the room. Vada just stood there. She was completely speechless. I had agreed with her. I had admitted fault. But I hadn't done what she actually wanted, which was for me to kick my friend out and grovel for forgiveness. I had validated her point and then immediately rendered it meaningless by continuing to do exactly what I was doing. She stood there for another 30 seconds, just radiating fury. Then she turned around, went back into her room, and slammed the door so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. Jimmy looked over at me. "Is she always like this?" "Pretty much," I said. "Don't worry about it." And we kept playing. The atmosphere in the apartment after that was thick. Not for me. I was fine. I stayed in my room, did my work, played my games, but the air around Vada was electric with resentment. I started hearing her on the phone with her friend, Marin. She would pace back and forth in the living room, talking loudly, making sure I could hear. It was always the same conversation. She would complain that I was completely emotionally unavailable, that I was a perfect example of toxic masculinity, refusing to engage or communicate. She told Marin it was like living with a ghost who left dirty dishes. She said my passivity was a form of aggression, that I was stonewalling her. She used a lot of buzzwords. I guess they made her feel like she had a diagnosis for my behavior, a framework to understand why I wasn't bending to her will. Marin, on the other end of the line, was her echo chamber. Oh my God, you're so right. That's classic male behavior. You're so strong for putting up with that. It was a feedback loop of validation for her. They were convincing each other that she was a martyr, bravely enduring life with an uncooperative savage. Her passive aggression ramped up. She started leaving notes, a post-it on my bedroom door. Some of us are trying to sleep. After I'd accidentally dropped something at 11 p.m., a note on the bathroom mirror. A clean space is a happy space. Let's all remember to wipe down the counter after we use it. She even started rearranging my things in the common areas. If I left a magazine on the coffee table, I'd find it later in a neat stack on a side table, placed at a perfect right angle. It was all designed to get a reaction, to make me snap, to finally have the confrontation she craved. But it was like throwing pebbles at a brick wall. I simply threw the notes away. I moved my magazine back. I didn't say a word. Every attempt she made to draw me into her drama was met with a calm, quiet, indifferent nothing. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was just trying to live my life, my peaceful, quiet life. And I was slowly realizing that the only way to protect that peace was to not engage on her terms. Ever. She wanted to fight. She wanted to argue, debate, lecture, and regulate. All I wanted was to be left alone, and it was driving her absolutely insane. I could feel it building. A storm was coming. She was running out of indirect methods. A direct, final confrontation was inevitable. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would be soon. She was like a battery, building up a charge of frustration and anger, and sooner or later she was going to have to discharge it. The breaking point came on a Wednesday, I think. It had been a quiet week, which was unusual, eerily quiet. Vada had been spending most of her time in her room. When she did come out, she wouldn't look at me. She moved around the apartment like a shadow, her silence more aggressive than any of her previous notes or lectures. I knew this was the calm before the storm. She was planning something, a final offensive. I was in the kitchen, making myself a sandwich for lunch. It was the middle of the day. She came out of her room. She wasn't in her usual loungewear. She was dressed in what I can only describe as confrontation clothes: jeans, a plain black t-shirt, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked like she was preparing for a job interview or an interrogation. She didn't go to the fridge or the cupboard. She walked right up to the kitchen island and stood on the other side, directly opposite me. She placed her hands flat on the counter. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was low and steady. All the frantic energy was gone. This was her serious voice. I finished spreading mustard on my bread. "Okay," I said, not looking up. "What's on your mind?" "This isn't working, Gary." I put a slice of turkey on the bread. "What isn't working?" "This. Our living situation. Your behavior." She took a deep breath, like she was centering herself. "I have tried to be reasonable," she started. "I have tried to establish a framework for mutual respect and cooperation. I laid out a perfectly logical, equitable system for us to coexist peacefully, and you have systematically dismantled it through your deliberate inaction." I added a slice of cheese. "You refuse to communicate. You ignore every rule. You treat this home like your own personal hotel, with no regard for the other person living in it. You are passive-aggressive, you are avoidant, and you are creating a deeply toxic environment." I put the other slice of bread on top of the sandwich and pressed down lightly. I finally looked up at her. For the first time, I wasn't just observing her. I was actually listening to the words she was using. Toxic, passive-aggressive, all these terms she was using to label me. It was like she had a flowchart for human interaction, and if you didn't follow the arrows, you were diagnosed as problematic. There was no room in her worldview for someone who just didn't care about the things she cared about. It had to be a pathology. It had to be a malicious strategy. The idea that I just genuinely did not want to participate in her social experiment was inconceivable to her. I picked up the sandwich. "Look, Vada," I said, my voice calm. "I think you're looking at this the wrong way." This seemed to catch her off guard. I was finally engaging. "I'm not trying to be difficult," I continued. "I'm not being passive-aggressive. I'm just living here. You came into my space, and I've let you do your thing. I don't touch your stuff. I stay out of your way. I pay my half of the rent. That's the deal." "The deal involves mutual respect," she shot back, her voice rising. "Right. And I respect you. I respect your right to live here and do whatever you want. Label the fridge, make a chore chart, write a constitution. Go for it. Have fun. But those are your things. They're not our things." I took a bite of my sandwich. It was a good sandwich. You can't just unilaterally decide how another person is going to live their life and then get angry when they don't comply, I said after swallowing. "You wrote those rules for you, not for me. I never agreed to them. I just agreed to let you post them on the fridge." A flicker of something crossed her face. It was panic. The foundation of her argument was cracking. But you said it was fine," she stammered. "In the meeting, you agreed." I said, "Looks fine." Which it did. It's a fine-looking document, lots of bullet points. But that's not a contract. I didn't sign anything. I was just trying to end a conversation I didn't want to have. The silence that followed was heavy. I had just pulled the entire rug out from under her. All the weeks of her building a case against me, of her seeing herself as the righteous enforcer of our sacred agreement. It all vanished. There was no agreement. There never had been. There was just her, and her list of rules. Her face went pale. "So, you've just been... what? Messing with me this whole time?" she asked, her voice small. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I haven't been doing anything. That's the whole point. I've just been living my life. You're the one who's been trying to turn this apartment into a social project. I'm just your roommate." I took another bite of my sandwich. "And to be honest," I added, "you seem really stressed out about it. Maybe you should just stop. Stop trying to control everything. Just live here too. It's a lot less work." She just stared at me. The anger was gone. The righteousness was gone. All that was left was a profound, raw confusion. Her entire operating system had just crashed. She looked like a robot that had been given a paradoxical command. Her programming couldn't compute a world where her rules had no power. Without another word, she turned and walked slowly back to her room, closing the door behind her. I finished my sandwich in the quiet kitchen. The storm had finally broken. And it had been a fizzle, not a bang. The aftermath was strange. The cohabitation agreement disappeared from the fridge that night. The chore wheel came down. The labels in the fridge stayed, but they seemed less like commandments and more like suggestions. Vada became a ghost. She would only leave her room when she was absolutely sure I wasn't in the common areas. I'd hear her door creak open late at night, the soft padding of her feet to the kitchen, the quiet click of the fridge, and then the retreat back to her room. We went days without seeing each other. Her loud phone calls with Marin stopped, or at least she started having them quietly in her room with the door closed. The tension was gone, replaced by a deep, awkward emptiness. It wasn't hostile. It was just nothing. We were two strangers living in the same building, sharing a kitchen. One afternoon, I was walking down the hall, and her door was slightly ajar. I heard her voice. She was crying. It wasn't loud, dramatic sobbing. It was that quiet, hopeless kind of crying. She was on the phone, presumably with Marin. "I don't understand," she was saying between sniffles. "I did everything right. I set boundaries. I communicated my needs. And he just doesn't care. It's like I don't exist." There was a pause. I could faintly hear Marin's tinny voice on the other end, probably offering the usual platitudes. "But what am I supposed to do?" Vada asked. "He won't fight me. He won't even get mad. How are you supposed to resolve a conflict with someone who won't even acknowledge that a conflict exists?" I kept walking. It felt wrong to listen, but her words stuck with me. She was genuinely suffering. Her entire sense of control over her environment had been taken away, not by force, but by sheer indifference. She was in a prison of her own making. She had built the walls, written the rules, and appointed herself the warden. The only problem was, the other inmate didn't recognize her authority and could simply walk through the walls whenever he felt like it. Her power was an illusion, and the moment it was exposed, her whole world fell apart. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I mostly just felt tired, and a little bit sad for her. It must be exhausting to live like that, trying to constantly manage and control every interaction, seeing every person as a potential variable to be regulated. About a week after the big non-confrontation, I got a call from Aunt Pearl. Her tone was very different this time, worried. "Gary, honey, is everything all right over there? Vada called me. She was very upset." I sighed. "Everything's fine, Aunt Pearl. We're just two very different people." "She said you've been ignoring her, making her feel isolated," she said. "She told me she feels like she's living in a hostile environment." I almost laughed at the buzzword. Vada had clearly escalated the issue up the chain of command. "Aunt Pearl, I promise you, I haven't done anything to her. I've just been living my life. She's the one who's been trying to change everything." I gave her the short version of the story, the agreement, the rules, the notes. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out the facts. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," Aunt Pearl said finally. Her voice was smaller. "Oh dear, she can be a bit intense, can't she?" Bingo. "She just has very strong ideas about how things should be," Aunt Pearl added, sounding like she was trying to convince herself. "That's one way to put it," I said. "Look, she's safe here. She has her room. But I'm not going to walk on eggshells in my own apartment. I can't do it." "I understand," she said. And she actually sounded like she did. "Thank you for being patient with her, Gary. I'll talk to her." We hung up. I knew what was coming. A few days later, I came home and saw 2 suitcases and a familiar cardboard box of books by the front door. Vada was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm moving out," she said. No preamble. I just nodded. "Okay." My aunt helped me find a room in a house with some other girls. It'll be a better fit. "Probably," I agreed. There was a long, awkward silence. She finished wiping the counter and threw the paper towel away. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I looked at her. "For what?" "For all of it," she said, gesturing vaguely at the apartment around her. I was trying to make things work, but I guess I went about it the wrong way. It was the closest she could get to admitting she was wrong. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. Water under the bridge. Another silence. "Well," she said, "my ride will be here in a few minutes." "All right. Good luck with the new place." And that was it. I went to my room and closed the door, giving her space to leave. A little while later, I heard the front door open and close. I heard her struggling with her suitcases one last time. Then, the sound of a car driving away. I waited a few minutes, then went out into the living room. The apartment was empty. It was quiet. The air felt lighter. I walked over to the fridge. It looked naked without the 3-page manifesto taped to it. I opened it. Her shelves were empty and wiped clean. It was just my food in there now. My pizza, my beer, my sandwich stuff. My quiet, orderly kingdom had been restored. The invasion was over. I hadn't fought a single battle, but I had won the war. I grabbed a beer, sat down on my couch, in my living room, in my apartment. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, it was completely, totally, and beautifully peaceful. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her ill. I just hoped that wherever she ended up, she would learn that you can't force the world to bend to your will. Sometimes, you just have to let people be. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all.